All right, good morning. I'd like to take you through Module 61 today. As you're watching this, I'll ask that you follow along on the copy of the slides that I handed you out in class. Fill in the blanks as we go, and we'll take care of Module 61 today. The idea of today's lesson, the learning targets, are to kind of get an understanding of how intelligence testing began and the purpose and design of some of the modern intelligence tests. If you remember from yesterday's video, the Kim Peek story, there were segments of that video where he was given an actual intelligence test. And one of the conclusions that the psychologist had given was that it was difficult to kind of put a score on him, and that standardized tests do have their limitations. So we do need to keep that in mind as we go through this, understanding that these tests are not the ultimate indicator of one's intelligence, but because of standardization, we can rely somewhat on their scores as good descriptors. So let's start at the beginning. We're going to introduce you to a guy by the name of Alfred Binet. He developed what was called the Binet-Simon test in France in 1905. His original intention was to help identify special needs children in schools. France was one of the first to try to initiate a public school system. Prior to this, schooling was only reserved for the elite, the aristocrats. But here, with the initiation of a public school trying to educate all children, there was a need to begin to place children in appropriate grade levels. So the origins of this first test came from this desire to place students properly in the correct grades. From there, we can credit Louis Terman for taking the Binet-Simon test and kind of giving a new spin on it, the American version of it, if you will, that he made popular in the 1920s, became known as the Stanford Binet test. And this was the first to use the formula of the intelligence quotient, the IQ score. Now, the way the IQ score is calculated according to Stanford Binet is you take one's mental age, which would be the age that you test at, and you divide into that their chronological age, which is their actual birth age. And you multiply that by 100 to get an IQ score. So the average IQ score would be 100. Let's say you had a child whose mental age was 10. Their chronological age is 10. That's 1 times 100 would be 100. So that was the earliest form of the IQ score that was used. And you can see here we have a child who has a mental age of 10. Their chronological age is 7. Divide 7 into 10, multiply that by 100, you get 142. So they are above the average. Now, one thing we note is the higher these chronological age numbers get and the mental age, it's difficult to differentiate between the two. So what is the mental age of a 40-year-old versus that of a 30-year-old? It's difficult to indicate that difference. So this test is not quite as suitable for older adults. We do want to make a side note here that Terman ultimately, in some cases, used this test not for the greatest of purposes. Eventually, these scores were used to discriminate against certain races and cultures by labeling them as less intelligent than others. Keep in mind, the 1920s, there was a great fear of immigration, especially from Southeast Europe. So a lot of times, these new immigrants would be labeled as less intelligent according to the intelligence quotient. And it may not necessarily have been that at all. It may have been a language issue, but this test did not account for that at all. So just keep that in mind as well. Now let's look at some of the modern tests here of mental abilities. We know this. There's really two types of testing. We have our aptitude testing and our achievement testing. The aptitude testing is designed to predict future abilities and future skills. So one's ability to grasp new concepts and work in future type endeavors. The SAT, the Scholastic Aptitude Test, we know is designed to predict one's ability to succeed in college. Do you have the skills necessary to succeed in college? You compare that to an achievement test, which is intended to reflect what you've already learned. So our AP Psych exam in May is going to test what you should have learned in a first-year college-level psych course. Now, the interesting thing, again, about the state of Michigan is we are using the SAT as well as an achievement test here. Juniors, you'll be taking that in the spring, and that's trying to see, again, if you've learned what you should be learning, in high school. So a little twist on that by the state of Michigan, but generally, the SAT is an aptitude test. When we look at some of the intelligence tests used for adults, or more modern times, I guess I should say, we look at the Wechsler Adult Intelligence Scale, and also Wechsler developed a scale for younger children. Keep in mind, we said the Stanford Binet test really doesn't work well with adults or younger children because of the issue of language. We know that adults and younger children who haven't quite grasped the concept of language yet can demonstrate intelligence in other ways. So as you see in the picture here, the Wechsler brings in the element of performance tests. Okay? In fact, there's 15 subtests in the Wechsler test. There's verbal, performance, and speed and accuracy also plays a role. Excuse me. Here you can see again some examples of some of the questions here that you might see on a verbal test. Some general information, similarities, vocabulary. There's the digit span that we saw yesterday in the video with Kim Peek. And I believe you also did some of these samples in your psych sim. Here's some of the performance ones, the picture completion, the block design, object assembly. And again, you saw in the video yesterday Kim Peek doing some of these as well. All right, let's look at some principles of test construction here. Lastly here, what we want to look at is the idea of standardization. One thing that I said we could hang our hats on when it comes to intelligence tests is that they are standardized. In other words, they are given under the same procedures, the same format over and over again. We see this also with tests like the SAT or AP Psych exam, tests that have been proven over time. And one of the reasons that we note they are standardized is because the results do tend to come out along the lines of our normal curve. We should remember this from our unit on research and statistics, unit 2, where we looked at the normal curve. And again, remember we said on the Wechsler test here, an average score is about 100 for an IQ with a standard deviation of 15. You can see how that progresses here on a normal curve. One other side note here when it comes to test construction principles is what's called the Flynn effect. One thing that we have noted over the last several decades is that about every 10 years, our IQ scores tend to rise 3 points. Now, there's a variety of possible explanations for that. One would be we are getting smarter, more intelligent, I guess. The other would be we're just getting better at taking tests. But one thing we should note, and you can see here kind of comparing a few countries, is that our IQ scores do tend to rise as the decades go on. Last component here of test construction, we want to look at reliability and validity. Let's start with reliability. When a test is reliable, it gives consistent results when it's given under similar conditions. So for example, I have 4 AP Psych tests, classes. If I give them all the same tests, typically the scores, the class averages are within a couple percentage points of each other. What that tells me is this test is reliable. If I had one class getting a class average of 90 and the other class getting a class average of 60 and another class getting an average of 80, that would tell me that perhaps it's not reliable because the scores are all over the place. One way to test reliability is to do split half check, where you can divide a test in two, have one class take the first half of the test, the other class take the second half of the test, and see if those halves agree. Last component here of test construction is validity. we want to make sure that the test is actually measuring what it's supposed to. Again, is an AP Psych test actually testing psychology, or is there more biology on it? Well, if that's the case, then we would say that the test is not content valid. Okay? No one likes to take a test where what you have learned is not on the test, right? So the question we ask is, does a test measure what it's supposed to have been learned? If so, then it's content valid. Another thing we can look at is predictive validity, where we compare tests of similar nature. So for example, someone takes an IQ test and they have a relatively high score, but they get a low score on the SAT. This is happening over and over again. We might begin to question the validity of one of those tests. Either the IQ test was too easy, the SAT test is too hard, but typically those scores should relate to each other on a consistent basis. If not, then the tests do not have predictive validity. All right, that is the end of today's video lecture. I hope you're able to make sense of this. If not, please ask questions, and we'll see you in class.